all the candidates have talked about increasing the size of the police force to varying degrees, 500, 1,000. And I think if we could bring the first panel back, they would say, not a bad idea, except that we know that it takes at least 10 police officers to get one police officer around the clock. 3 shifts, vacations, so even 1,000 police officers translates into 100 around-the-clock cops, which is not nothing, but just could be important. But in each of your plans, as you've articulated them here tonight, but also the plans that your campaigns have released, you also talk about doing policing differently, doing different kinds of policing that have been done in the recent past in Philadelphia. So if you could each just comment briefly on not only size of force, but what kind of policing you're going to be looking for as mayor, beginning with Representative Evans.
What was mentioned earlier by one of the researchers is they talked a little bit about Mayor Street has something called Safe Streets. And what he basically did is he put out about what would equal something like about 600 police officers in flooding corners. And the vast majority of them focused on ensuring, moving people off of the corners. I asked Sylvester Johnson, how many officers would that be in terms of manpower? It would be in the ballpark, he said to me, about 500 to 600. So basically, if you notice when the current mayor did Safe Streets, he really flooded the corners, which equal 500 or 600 different officers. The fundamental question is, do you use police officers from a standpoint of overtime, or do you increase the manpower? I believe that the police force should be in the ballpark of about 7,000 individuals. And the reason I used that particular number was that was the particular number when Rendell was mayor of the city of Philadelphia, and then when John Timmons was police in the ballpark of 7,000. The second aspect that I think is extremely important, what was done by the Clinton initiative, was kind of community policing. It was a combination of community policing that was used very effectively. So one of the things I constantly hear back in terms of people in the community is the question around response time. Do we have the presence? In my view, it's raising the presence. I take the Center City District as a perfect example with Paul Lee and what he does there. It's raising the presence. If you look at from 1991 in the reduction of crime activities in Center City, what he basically used was an extension, not necessarily of police force, but he had these people who was out there on the corner using walkie-talkies and things of that nature. So what I'm basically talking about is the aspect of beat police officers, monitoring of certain areas in terms of how they are deployed. So I believe you do need, at least what was said to me by Sylvester Johnson, who testified before the City Council in February. He testified on the basis of needing 500 additional officers versus the mayor who's wanted to use overtime. Overtime, in my view, burns out individuals. They get, obviously some retired and obviously not able to do what they need to do. So my sense was you might as well increase the manpower rather than use the basis of overtime. And I talked about that over a period of time.
Let's imagine for a moment the following year. Each of you has a crime plan, your written crime plans, the crime plans you've outlined here tonight, multifaceted. It's got mentoring, it's got monitoring, it's got ministering, it's got a lot of different facets, comprehensive approach in all cases. But what if manna fell from heaven on day one in the mayor's office, you had $50 million unrestricted dollars, and the only catch was you had to apply it to one thing. Could be your police, could be expanding prevention programs, could be anything, as a way of helping us get a handle. I know it's a kind of a question that only a professor could love, but as a way of getting a handle on your priorities, because each of your crime plans is thick and complex in its way. What would you do with that 50 million?
I would apply that 50 million to prevention. I would provide that $50 million to prevention. I would work on attempting to change the behavior before it gets on the back end. It's extremely costly. It seems like we've had to go through 25 years to really understand that it's not working. We have far more people in prison, we have far more people on death row, but we fundamentally have not changed the direction of behavior. And ultimately, the key is changing the direction of behavior. This city's budget, like the state's budget, has what you call, I hate to use this term, cost drivers. And one of the major cost drivers is prisons, the whole criminal justice system. The whole aspect is trying to prevent people from getting into that particular system. But I think that we have to build accountability in terms of where we make the investments. It's not a question of just throwing money out there, it's how effective. We have to look at what type of initiatives work at the early stages to redirect the behavior. I don't think there's any city in the nation, or any state in the nation, who's figured out a way to kind of have what I talked about earlier, and Dr. Rich talked about that, in terms of a public health approach. I think we talk about, we talk about prevention, but do we really believe in prevention? We talk about it, but do we really believe in it? Is it in our DNA? And I believe that that's where we are today. We're at a point where, the only reason I would say we generally are having these kinds of conversations about prevention and public health, because we recognize that 44,000 people in prison, more people in city prison, budgets that then take away money from education, all these kinds of things. We're forced to move in that direction. So now we're at a point where we're forced, and we got this pressure on us to try to figure out how we reverse this behavior. I go back to what I said earlier. We got to talk about things like personal responsibility. We got to talk about this. We got to have those kinds of discussions. We got to talk about the parenting aspect of it. We have to talk about those things. Now, there's no question that the issue of gun policy is too many, guns, and obviously that should be changed. And that's something we need to do, but we need to change it. We need to change that from a national standpoint too. It needs to be a state standpoint and a national standpoint. So I generally think if you said that I had $50 million and it wasn't necessarily locked into anything, I'll be talking about preschool, early intervention. I'll be talking about what this concept I put together called Kid Zone, where you're fundamentally working at the early stages. Because, once these kids get to a certain point, between 15 to 18, as I said to you, between 18 to 40, the question is, how do we redirect that kind of behavior? And I say to you, as a city and as a state in the country, we're kind of reacting. We're trying to catch up with something that a number of us said, and I said this in closing. I said this when I first got elected in the legislature. I talked about there needed to be mandatory kindergarten in 1980. I talked about it then. And now here we are 27 years later, and we're still debating things that we know could work, but we just haven't made the kinds of investments we need to make.
Thank you.